so much. It's a big zechus to be here. This is sponsored by Sarah Levine and family. That was Sarah Goldberg Levine, in memory of her father's second yahrzeit. Manish Yitzchak ben Aryeh Zefon Livracha, and that's Zion Tammuz is his yahrzeit. Shalom Shadav and Aliyah. Thank you very, very much for sponsoring. And I don't know if you've encountered this, but lately, sporadically, I've been bombarded a little bit with people sometimes who try to tell me we have to make Aliyah. We all need to move to Eretz Yisrael right now. So I decided that I would discuss that. Has that happened to anybody here? And is anybody confused at all about the halacha, about Yishuv Haaretz? Are we Heigh to really live in Eretz Yisrael today? This is not going to be a comprehensive halachic study, nor obviously a psak halacha, but it's going to be a halachic exploration into that possibility. Do we really have to live in Eretz Yisrael today? And a little bit of hashkafa that goes with it. And I love interactive things, but it looks like there's a lot of muting going on out there. That's just one of those Zoom idiosyncrasies. So just do the best we can. So first of all, first off, we have to realize wherever a person is, the person can be in Eretz Yisrael. The person can be in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, who's the one who says that? It's in many places. But the Mesilas Yesharim tells us near the end of the Sefer, HaKadosh Hadavek Tamid Le'Lopav. A person is always clinging to Hashem, V'nafsho Misaleches Ben HaMuspalos HaMitios, and his soul travels, it goes, interacts with true intellect and close to perfection and ruchnius as possible. The Avas Boro V'Yirasa, with love and fear of Hashem. Hine Nechshav Lo, and I know you might know this already, it's all bearing repetition. It's considered to that person, Kilu Hu Mishalech Lifnei Hashem, as if the person's walking in front of Hashem. The Artzos HaChayim, the lands of the living. Odenu Po Ba'olam Hazeh, while he's still in this world here. The Hine Ish Kazeh, such a person who Atzmo, he himself, he's Eretz Yisrael, wherever he is. Nechshav, Kemishkan, he's like the tabernacle, the great Mishkan that we had. Kemikdash, he's like the Beis HaMikdash. Uchel Mizbeach, he's like the Mizbeach. That person becomes a source and a headquarters and a concentration of Shechina, just like Chazal said, by Avram Avinu. By Yahweh Olav Elokim, when Hashem ascended from upon Abraham. So what does that mean? The Medrash Rabbi explains. Gracious Laman Hey Gimel. Avos Hein Hamer Kava. Tzaddikim like the Avos are the chariot for Hashem. They're Hashem's vehicle in this world. Tzaddikim Hein Hamer Kava. Not just the Avos. Everyone could be a chariot. Rebbeinu Shalom says, hey, I want to hitch a ride. I want to feel comfortable. I want a really wonderful, accommodating, spiritual Uber. I don't think they have them in Eretz Yisrael, right? But in Olam Hazeh, I want to feel comfortable with someone. The tzaddikim, the tzidkanios, hashchina shora aleim k'mo shehoya shora b'mikdash. So right off the bat, the Mesilas Yesharim tells us that wherever we are, we can be Eretz Yisrael. We can be the highest level of kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. We could be the Mishkan. We could be the Mizbeach. We could be the Beis HaMikdash, the Kodesh HaKadosh. But the truth is, on the other hand, it kind of sounds like we have to be physically in Eretz Yisrael. It sounds like that from this Gemara. Tell me what you think about it. We look in the Gemara Ksubos. Because Tana Rabbanan, here's a brayso. Who Omer Lalos? Let's say a man comes from Shalom Bayis. Let's say a man says he wants to go to Eretz Yisrael. Rashi explains this couple who are living in the Chutz La'aretz, and the husband says, "Listen, honey, let's make Aliyah. Let's go to Eretz Yisrael." Or Mishar Kabul in Yerushalayim. Even same idea. They're living in, let's say, somewhere else. They're living in Meron. They're living in Hebron. And does anybody live in Meron? Yeah. Whatever. They say wherever they're living. We want to go. The husband says, let's move to Yerushalayim. But he omer shelo lalos. But the wife says, no, I'm sorry. I'm comfortable where I am. I like it in Cincinnati. I like it in Brooklyn. I like it in Detroit. Or in Eretz Yisrael, I like it in wherever I am. And somewhere else in Eretz Yisrael. I don't want to move to Yerushalayim. Kofin osal lalos. What's the halacha? We tell her she has to go. It's a halacha. V'im lav takes below ksuba. And if she does refuse to go, then the husband has the right to divorce her, and she does not get her ksuba, her alimony benefits, which is really devastating and traumatic to not have any support. Yeah, but you think it's lopsided? No. Don't worry, it's even.
What's the other side? He omeres lalos. What if the wife insists? Says, listen, we got to go to Eretz Yisrael, or we have to move to Yerushalayim. Who omer shelo lalos? But the husband says, I like where I am. What's the halacha? Kofin oso lalos. Then we force him halachically to go. V'im lav yotzi v'yiten ksuba. And if he refuses the right to demand a divorce, and he has to give ksuba the full benefits of a divorcee. So it really goes both ways. And it's similar next halacha. He omeres lot says, let's say the wife says, okay, we're living in Israel. I've had enough here. It's time to leave. Who omer shalom lot says? The husband says, no, we have to stay in Eretz Israel. Kofin osa, again, we forced her because she has to go along with it. And it says, shalom lot says. I'm sorry, so what this case was, so I like to look at it again. Our second case was where she wants to go out and he wants to not go out. So then we force, let me just start again. Sorry, it's been a long day. She says to go out and he says not to go out. Then it says, we force her not to go out, and if not, then she goes out without ksuba. Who omer Allah? It's a good thing we're not recording it. If he says to go out, we want to leave Eretz Yisrael. Bottom line is that whoever wants to stay in Eretz Yisrael, whoever wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, that person wins. That's what the halacha is saying here. Who omer Allah says? He says, I want to go out. He omer Shalom says she's not to go out. Then she wins. So we force it. So the bottom line is, as we understand, it sounds like whoever wants to stay in Eretz Yisrael, that person is right. Whoever wants to move to Eretz Yisrael, that person is right. This Gemara is saying this. If we pass from Gemaras, it sounds like we all have to make aliyah. It's a little bit of a tough situation if the husband and wife don't agree. Now, it sounds like if they both agree we're going to stay in Chutz La'aretz, so then it sounds like it's okay. But if one of them insists on going, then the other one has to listen. But what does Tosfos say about it? Eino noeg bizman hazeh. Tosfos says it doesn't apply today. No. When the husband insists on going and the wife doesn't want to go, so she has to go. Or she wants to go and he doesn't want to go, he has to go. Or one of them wants to leave, we don't listen to that person. He says it doesn't apply today. Tosfos says the reason is because it's dangerous. Traveling is dangerous. Okay, you might say, well, it's not dangerous anymore, right? Maybe it is dangerous. There's another reason not to. Anybody know the other reason? Okay, everybody's muted, so it can't be that interactive. Achshav eino mitzvah lo deberetz Yisrael. Achshav eino mitzvah lo deberetz Yisrael. Today it's not a mitzvah to live there. Ki yesh kama mitzvos hatzluyos ba'aretz. There are many mitzvahs that depend on Eretz Yisrael, agricultural especially. But kama onshin, many punishments. The ein ono yicholin lizor b'hem v'lam aleh. We're not able to be careful and to stand up to such demands. So Rabbeinu Chaim says in Tosfos, that whole halacha, that the husband can insist on going to Eretz Yisrael, on being Ola, or the wife can insist on being Ola, and the husband cannot insist on leaving, and the wife cannot insist on leaving. Basically, they have to be there. That does not apply today. First he says because it's dangerous to travel, and then he comes and says, well, there's another consideration. Well, what about all the mitzvahs that are dependent on Eretz Yisrael? And there's so many demands, who's going to be able to keep all that? If you don't have to do it, you shouldn't do it. That's what Rabbeinu Chaim says. Right? So a mitzvah you don't have to do, he says if you don't have to do it, this mitzvah, then you shouldn't do it. Sometimes there are mitzvahs like that. He doesn't hold that it's extra credit. Oh yeah, it's a mitzvah kiyumish, right? If you go there, you get mitzvah credit. Just avoid it for those reasons. So what's the halacha? Does anybody know? You could nod or whatever. I don't know if there's other people here, but does anybody know what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says about this whole thing? Because you know what? It's still down. Let's just talk about Rabbi Moshe passed away in 1986 from the greatest poskim ever. He was asked this question. Bottom line, do we need to live in Eretz Yisrael today? This is found in the Even HaEzer. I said this on my Shabbos table a couple weeks. So maybe it'll be something new for some people. And regarding your question, if there's a mitzvah to live in Israel today, the Ramban feels there's mitzvah credit. Let's be careful now. You get mitzvah credit for living there. Or like the Rabbeinu Chaim we just saw on Tosfos. We just read it. There ain't no mitzvah. Rabbeinu Chaim, who's an important Rishon in Tosha, says it's not even a mitzvah in Ganson today. In a robe, haposkim sabri. Mitzvah. That's a mitzvah to live there. Wait a minute. We have to go. Wait a minute. That's the majority. It says it's a mitzvah. Wait. No, wait. Don't worry. No. I'm telling you that it's a mitzvah. That's the extra credit mitzvah. Even according to the majority who says it's a mitzvah, that is not a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's not obligatory. It's just if you do it, you get credit for it. Ein zeh bizman hazeh mitzvah chiyuvis shal haguf. It's not applicable and required on each person to live in Eretz Yisrael today. Rav Moshe says definitively, even according to those who say it's a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's just a mitzvah chiyuvis. Non-obligatory. It's elected. Din Kain, Rav Moshe says, if it would be obligatory, compulsory, then automatically you have to live in Eretz Yisrael. So then you know what that means? Very simply. Then anybody who's sitting anywhere else besides Eretz Yisrael living there, they're making a mistake. Halachically, they're violating halacha. He says, Mishum she'over aseh, because he's not fulfilling the positive commandment of living in Israel. But he says that can't be, Rav Moshe said. It's not true. So just forget about that. Anybody tells you have to make aliyah, no. Even the road post who say that there's a mitzvah, that's mitzvah credit. It's not obligatory. It's called a mitzvah kiyum. So if you do it, then you're doing something extra credit. Example, a man who wears a garment, the four-cornered skin, guess what he's about to say? He wears a four-cornered garment and fails to fix tzitzis on that garment. Okay, so then he's not allowed to wear that garment. But why? Is he doing an avera or lo saseh? No, there's no lo saseh. We hadn't messed with parsha. It's a mitzvah saseh to put tzitzis on. Well, if you have a four-cornered garment and wear it without tzitzis, the man is being over on a mitzvah saseh. His passivity is causing him to violate the fulfillment, meaning to not fulfill. His inactivity caused him to not fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis, which he needed to do because he had a four-cornered garment. Well, it's the same concept. If it would be true that we all have to live in Eretz Yisrael, then by living somewhere else, then we're not fulfilling the mitzvah saseh of living in Eretz Yisrael. But that's not true, what Moses says. You're not fulfilling, you're not required, you're not violating anything. And even if you do it, you're not fulfilling a required mitzvah. You're fulfilling something that's not required by living in Eretz Yisrael. So it's not true that you have to live there. Below Huskar Ister Ella Avador Be'eretz Yisrael Shasur Latzis Amanas Lishkon L'Chutzaretz. The only prohibition is if we're living in Israel already, then we're not allowed to live permanently in Chutz La'aretz unless there are considerations, as it says in the Rambam Parakim in Hilchos Malachim, which we're going to read in a few minutes. And he says, because he says the Gam came. So he says that he says even the people who leave Eretz Yisrael illegally, because they should not have left because they didn't have a good reason to leave. Again, it's not a negative commandment that they're violating. Again, they're just not fulfilling the mitzvah of continuing to live in Israel. Meaning, the gravity of the Avera is not an Isser. It's for the people who live there already. They have to stay there. They have a mitzvah to stay there, unless they have a good reason to leave, which we'll talk about soon. And for us, in Chutz La'aretz, if we're living here already, we don't have an obligatory mitzvah say to live there. But if one does live there, the person gets mitzvah credit. But it is not a chiyuv at all. And the Rambam does not say Asur Lishkon Chutz La'aretz. There's no such thing. There's no halacha like that. That people living in Eretz Yisrael, they're not allowed. The Chachamim said they can't leave unless they have the good reasons that we're going to talk about. But the mitzvah saseh is not a mitzvah saseh chiyuvis for us, for sure, who live in Chutz La'aretz. But when you're living there, then you fulfill a mitzvah. When you go there from Chutz La'aretz, and even those living there are fulfilling a mitzvah saseh. It's not for say a lo saseh to live. So the Chachamim prohibited it, so you shouldn't not fulfill the mitzvah saseh once you're living there. So Rav Moshe says, I talked a lot about this, and remember Rabbeinu Chaim. Now listen to the punchline. Kivan she'ena mitzvah chiyuvis, since it's not obligatory, yesh vadai lizkashe v'chashash Rabbeinu Chaim the Tosos. And now he really puts the icing on the cake. Once I'm telling you, Rav Moshe Feinstein said that you don't have to live there then you have to think about Rabbeinu Heigh. Rabbeinu Heigh said, "In yuchal lizar b'mitzvos atzlius ba'aretz." So he's trying to tell us, okay, step one, I've proven to you that even according to the majority of Rishonim who say that you get mitzvah credit for living there, that is not an obligation. When you're outside Eretz Yisrael, you have no obligation. People living there are not allowed to live in Chutz La'aretz unless they have a good reason. Since we don't have a chiyuv to move there, then Rav Moshe says think twice or more than twice before you move there. Now it's a little more than just saying you don't have to. He's suggesting maybe you shouldn't. Perhaps you shouldn't, because Rabbeinu Chaim and the Tosfos said that I shouldn't move. Rabbeinu Chaim holds you should not move there because there's so many mitzvahs to come upon us there. So anybody who doesn't move there actually has a very legitimate excuse for not moving. Say, listen, there are mitzvahs I have to keep, and if I go to Eretz Yisrael, I have obligatory mitzvahs. I won't be able to keep them properly. Let's look at that Rambam though. If there's any questions, please. I don't even know. I can't see. Whatever. This is Zoom, Okay. Let me just read you the Rambam. One of my favorite lines of Rambam. Here we go. Anybody who tries to tell you, you are not allowed to be here. No, you cannot stay here. By the way, I want to tell you something that's really in Shiur they call it krum. Very crooked. I'm even hesitant to say it. Someone tried to tell me, they said, Hilukim Pasha Shlach. Look, the Jews didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael, and they got punished. So no. This is what someone once said to me. So how do you answer that? It's pretty easy, isn't it? There was a mitzvah on that generation to go to Eretz Yisrael. It was a chiyuv. It's called Yisrael Ad Masam. We were supposed to establish a commonwealth, an autonomous society with a melech, with a base of mikdash. It was a chiyuv to be there. Once we've been scattered among the nations, among the goyim and golos, there is no chiyuv to live there. You're going to see that very soon. There's no correlation whatsoever between this and that, between the Zohar HaMidbar and us. Listen to the Rambam, Hilchos Malachim, Perek Heigh Halacha Zayin. Umutar lishkon b'chol ha'olam. Dr. Rambam, it's mutter to live in the whole world. Chutz mei Eretz Mitzrayim. I should have. There's only one place you can't live, the Rambam says, and that's Egypt. Now we're going to talk about that pretty soon, because the author who just said that was living in Egypt. One just said he can't live in Egypt. He lived there. And the Nosei Kalim, the unfortunately said, well, what about the Machaber who said you can't live in Egypt? He was living in Mitzrayim. All right, we'll see about that a little bit soon. It's not the same Egypt, according to many poskim. So geographically it is, but it's not the same people. So the Rambam tells us, okay, let's talk about Mitzrayim a little bit. Am I allowed to go back? Because if you can't live somewhere, that's going to be Mitzrayim. So yeah, even Mitzrayim, the Rambam tells us you can go back to Mitzrayim for business, schora, pragmatia, for commerce, to conquer lands. You need to go through Egypt, maybe to camp there for a while, stay over in order to get to other lands to conquer. And the only issue is to settle in Mitzrayim. This is Egypt we're talking about. He says there's no malchus for it, there's no lashes, because when a person goes to Egypt, this is in case you're going to Egypt. And I know people who have. When you go into Egypt, even in their time, when Egypt was off limits to live there, when you go in there, it's okay because you're allowed to go there, we said, temporarily. This is even in their time. And then if the person who goes in there thinks, I like it here, I'm going to settle, I like Alexandria, I like Cairo. He thinks that, well, he doesn't get malchus for the thought because you don't get lashes for thinking something. I'm just going through some technicalities of how the mitzvahs of the Torah work, which you're probably familiar with that. Then the Rambam says that if a Jewish king, a Melech Yisrael, conquered Egypt based on Bezdin's directive, then it was allowed. The only prohibition was for individuals to move there or to live there, and it's in the hands of non-Jews because the actions of the Egyptians were extremely decadent. They were the most promiscuous, immoral society in the world. As it says, don't do like the actions of Egypt and like the actions of Canaan. As we know, by the way, we were between a rock and a hard place. We left one place that was like that and went into another place. That's why we had to conquer the people we came into, the 7 nations of Canaan. They were no better than the Mitzrayim, those two places. It says it, as we know, Parshat Acharemus. Now, we do want to mention, though, he says that they were the most corrupt of all the countries, of all the lands. And I'm sure you're familiar with Ibn Ezra, who mentions that Egypt underwent a very positive change when they were conquered by whom? That's right, the Ishmaelim. When the Arabs conquered Egypt, then they ascended in in their spirituality. They went from polytheism, paganism, to monotheism, because Islam is definitely monotheism. So you should know that Mitzrayim, described here traditionally in Chumash by the Rishonim, the Gemara and everything, is not the same society as Mitzrayim. So I know you're probably thinking, why am I talking about living in Egypt? Nobody's thinking of doing that. But it's an interesting reference to know that the Rambam says, Mutter lishkon b'chol ha'olam. Whatever city you're living in, if you're not in Israel, you are not violating anything, because you're allowed to live in the whole world, except for Eretz Mitzrayim. Now later, the Rambam suggests you live in Israel, you get mitzvah credit. It's praiseworthy. The Gemara talks so much about it. Beautiful, fantastic. But it's not an obligation. And when there are considerations holding us to where we are, we have jobs, we're friends, that's also important. We're used to society being a certain way. We know this is not our home. Yeah, we all know that. We know there's only one place we're comfortable. Yeah, that's Eretz Yisrael. We know that already. But there's no issue to live here. Everything's temporary. And now just to clarify, what about the Indian of leaving Eretz Yisrael? Rambam says we cannot leave Eretz Yisrael. Asher Allah says Eretz Yisrael. If you live there, you cannot leave. Ella, now who knows all the exemptions? The exceptions. Ella Wilmo Torah? Imagine that. Person's living in Eretz Yisrael, but the yeshiva, he is a yeshiva that would work better for him in Chutz La'aretz. He's actually allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. It'll be temporary. If he's living in Eretz Yisrael, we said he cannot leave. He can leave Eretz Yisrael for these reasons, which are the exceptions. To learn Torah, or Lisa Isha to get married, or Lahatzal Min Ha'akum, or to save people from non-Jewish aggression. But Yamshar La'aretz, he should go back to Eretz Yisrael. He can also go out for business. Yes, question? Or was that? Okay, one of those Zoom interference thing. Okay, he can also go out for commerce, but he's not supposed to leave Eretz Yisrael if he lives there to live permanently in Chutz La'aretz, except there's one exception. So in other words, all the things we just said, he can leave Eretz Yisrael temporarily if he's living there already. By the way, everyone always should ask Mishpael, whoever's living in Eretz Yisrael needs to leave Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam says the following things are temporary exemptions. They're allowances to leave. So he said to learn Torah, to get married, to save people from enemy armies, from the non-Jews, you should go back. And also for business. All those, you should go back. But he's not allowed to leave permanently unless there's a famine. Now I want to mention something really cool. Where in Chumash do we have Psak Halacha? You're allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael because of a famine. Where did it happen in Chumash? Give you a hint. It sounded like a violation of Kibbutz, but it wasn't. You got it. I bet you're thinking this. Somebody sent a message, and he said to his father, Rida Elai al Tamo, come down to me. Don't stay where you are. Now that's a son talking to his father. And who was that? Of course, it was Yosef talking to Yaakov. And he said, you can come down. Now the Lutz Karab says, where do you find a son talking to a father that way? Rida Elai al Tamo. Well, it's a Psak Halacha. He's the chief rabbi of Egypt, Yosef at that time. It's not Pras Paneah. He didn't like that name, so he's Yosef Hatzadi. He says, Abba, during a famine, it's mutter to leave Eretz Yisrael and to live in Mitzrayim. And that's why he was telling him in that lashon, which is so emphatic, it's not a violation of Kibbutz Aved. He's stating the halacha to his father. Because he's the Rav, he's the posik of Mitzrayim. That's how the Lutz explains that. And that's what the Rambam just said. You can leave Eretz Yisrael. You can even leave Eretz Yisrael to live in Chutz La'aretz because of a famine. Okay, so I just wanted to discuss briefly, though. You know what? There's another country that you might not be allowed to live in. There's actually another country. Does anybody know what that is? One other country. So we're going to see about this. First of all, we have to explain why were there some people, just briefly, think about Egypt. There were some people living in Egypt. You know there were Yidden living in Egypt. Gemara talks about this. Now, why are they allowed to do that? The Rabbi asks this question. Now, the rules we're going to see from this are extremely important to understand because it applies to a lot of areas of halacha. To me, Milsa, what are people relying on that they're living in Mitzrayim in this day and age? The Rambam lived there. So here's one answer. Those cities of the Egyptians already were confused. Who was the person who came along and he mixed up all the nations of the world? That's right, Sancherib. So it says it's really not the same cities. These are different cities that were settled afterward. Rabbi Elazar said the prohibition was only for a person to go back from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim. Because it says in the Torah, don't go back in this way anymore. Meaning you came from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. To go back from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim to live there, what was us? Go to Mitzrayim from any other country was not us. That's another opinion. That's the pasuk it says. Lo sosifu lashuv b'derech hazeh. This explains the Rambam. By the way, the Rambam was a doctor to the Sultan, as you know. Others say, and this was brought by Rav Shlomo Zalman Braun. He said that some people hold the only Yisrael was Yisrael Shruin al Admasa. When we were living in Eretz Yisrael, we had a king, we had a base of Mikdash, then we're not allowed to go back to Mitzrayim. But Bizman Hazeh, now listen to the lesson of this tshuva. Shenigzar aleinu liyos nidachim b'chol kitzvei haaretz mutter. There's a decree on Bnei Israel that we're scattered all over the world. It's not an accident that we're scattered all over the world. It's not like you aren't allowed to be here. Pick up and go to Eretz Israel now. No, it's a gzeira that we're out here. There are some hidden out here. Now, people want to go. That's fine. They get themselves fired from the Moses Rishonim. Rabbeinu Heigh said not to. Rabbeinu Heigh and Tosfos. Or Moshe said maybe you should think about that before you go there. Maybe you shouldn't go there. Truvos, maestros, shmits, all that stuff. But there's a gzeira. It's not an accident that we're here. And while we're here, we're supposed to spread Torah, at least among ourselves. Now, there's another country. I just figured something a little different. There's another country that is a trial of whether you can live there. I'll give you a hint. What happened was, there was a rumor, halakhic rumor, that at a certain expulsion, the Jews accepted it upon themselves, and they made a ban, a cherem, to never live in this land again. And guess what land that is? That's right. Yes, that's it. We got somebody answered it. Spain. That's right. It says, yes, we have it. Tova. Yes. Oh yeah. Okay. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It is Spain. So the question is, are you allowed to live in Spain today? Now, does anybody know any Jews who live in Spain? That's the shiur. Well, there are probably some Jews living in Spain. So now, the reason we're doing this is, again, to demonstrate that we're not Heigh to pick up and move to Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, there are some countries maybe we shouldn't live in. Egypt, we already said, there are enough reasons to explain that we're really allowed to live in. So you can really live in Egypt today. But Spain, what about that? So there was a call that came out. It was a halakhic rumor that when they were chased out of there by the expulsion of the Inquisition, they accepted upon themselves to never go back to Spain. The Minchas Elazar, the Munchat Rebbe, was asked the shiur, famous Minchas Elazar. Are we allowed to live there? Now, why am I doing this? I have a reason for it. Not just because it's pretty interesting, but because there's a big yisod in halacha that we're about to discover. That big foundation. And the foundation is, the Minchas Elazar said, don't even be concerned about that rumor, because I'm pretty sure, he says, halachically, that it's not true. Why? Because it's not found in the Sifrei HaKadmonim. If it's not in the books of the Rishonim, then you can assume it's not true. Something that important, like there are charamim, there are bans, like Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, Cherem Rabbeinu Tam. You know, there are Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. It's public to me, not reading person's mail. There's a Cherem for certain things, but this is not there. And those things are brought down, the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. The Sefer Kolbo, the Maram Rutenberg. By the way, in case anybody wants to know the time span, we're going to go till should be about 9 o'clock, in case you're curious. Okay, you want to plan out your evening here. So, it gets better than that. The Beis Yosef, his father's father, the Beis Yosef's father's father, we know what the Beis Yosef is, right? That's one of the Shahar, Yosef Karo. He also wrote his Pirush on the Torah and other stuff. His father's father was chased out of Spain. He was expelled from Spain. The Beis Yosef himself was 10 years old at that time, and he mentioned nothing in his Sefer about it. When something is not mentioned, something so important is not mentioned, that's also significant. That teaches us something. And even if maybe it's a cherem, maybe there was a ban, but for sure the Ashkenazim are not concerned about it whatsoever. We would never accept such a cherem, because we weren't as Spartan, we were chased out anyway. It's also brought down in a Sheila Shlomo, that later Sefer, that it's not so clear that there was any ban on living in there. The Akbar Benel, in his Pirush on Malachim, he talks at length about the Spanish Inquisition and being expelled, and he didn't mention anything about it. However, there's one posting who says it would be a good idea that Rabbanim should get together and release that chayr. Isn't that interesting? So if you think you're moving to Spain, just ask your local Orthodox Rav about it. If you're Ashkenazi, then don't even worry about that at all. If you really have the inclination to move to Spain. However, the Mabit, who's a very important Afon, says, "Anu betuchim shelo yahil sham Yehudim." He really does not feel very positive toward the country of Spain. He says, we're positive that no Jew would ever want to live there, but it doesn't seem to be that there was a chayre. Interesting. I just want to go back to Egypt for a minute. Rabbeinu Bechaya about Egypt, who's a important Rishon, says in Parsha Shoftim, it's not a mitzvah for generations to not live in Egypt. It doesn't even imply it was only temporary. The Egyptians were extremely abominable and immoral, and that doesn't, I don't know today how it is, but definitely not like it was then. Again, it was a step up. By the way, we know that in ancient Egypt, they were vegetarians par excellence. We already know that from Chumash. And now they eat meat in Egypt. That's a big proof that something major changed there because the Arabs eat meat. You know, they have to have their whatever, shkita, whatever that is. But in the Vela, no, shkita was in the Vela, but at least they do something. They eat meat, so it's a step up. They're more civilized. They don't put themselves on par with animals. They realize they're superior to animals, which definitely works on a person to act superior to animals when they'll eat meat once in a while, because they'll eat that, and that impresses upon us the superiority of a human being, which is a big concept that Yitzchak talks about. So he says it's not the same society. Now there's one more place we're going to talk about before we come to our concluding statements, which are probably a bit more relevant. There's one more location. Now somebody got the last one. There's a city that you're not allowed to build anymore. Now anybody pop that up on the earth. This city. Oh, Sodom. Now that's not bad. Now Sodom doesn't say we're not allowed to build up Sodom anymore. You know, we do not know. We'd be surprised. But there's another one. Thank you for not being shy. There's another city that says you're not allowed to build. I don't know about Sodom. Okay, I'm not sure, but I don't think it says in the Navi you can't build it. There was an issue to build the city. I'll give you a hint. Somebody's kids died. Chiomi Beisel. He built it up, and they died one by one because he built up. That's it. There we go. It's Yericho. So it's brought down in Chuvos. Okay, what about Yericho? Now, I don't think you want to live in it's Jericho, right? There's a bunch of angry Palestinians there now. No, am I wrong about that? Jericho? Am I wrong? I don't know. I don't know. Am I wrong? There are people who don't like us in Yericho for the most part now. I could be wrong. I don't think it's I think it's an Arab neighborhood. But the question is, if you want to build it, you want to live in Yericho, are you allowed to? So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Interesting shaila. And this is brought to my Rav Shlomo Zalman Braun, who said that the Talmud Yerushalmi Sanhedrin explained Yoshua made an oath and a ban not to build Yericho. But if it's built, then you can live there. So concluding all that, those are just kind of like corollary topics. Living in Eretz Yisrael, Rov poskim hold that there's mitzvah credit for it, but none of them hold, Rav Moshe finds it, that's a chiyuv today. The minority hold is not even extra credit mitzvah. There is an opinion that says it's better not to, Rabbeinu Heigh and Tosfos, because you have to think about, am I going to be able to Heigh all those mitzvahs properly in Eretz Yisrael? And that's what people living in Chutz La'aretz. People in Eretz Yisrael, they have to ask a shaila, they have to have a reason, a heter to be allowed to leave. Now I do want to mention something about the United States. So what's our attitude about the United States, the U.S. government? We're not getting into politics. I don't even know anything about it, so I wouldn't be able to. And frankly, it's one of my, interest level. It's probably really, really, really a million times less than fire, that's for sure. It's a negative number. But it comes up once in a while a little bit in Shilas and Tshuvas. So have you heard the tshuva about the proposed draft for women in the United States? Have you ever heard this tshuva? Now, the reason I'm talking about it is because I'm not going to get into that, but I want you to hear what Moshe Feinstein said about the United States. Again, we know this is not our future. We know this is not where we belong. But listen to this. It was heard in 1979 or 1980, there was a possibility that in the United States, Moshe says, Arshot HaBris of America, I'm going to read you the Hebrew words. But there's a little noise there. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Is that from my side? Okay, anyway. So static in the background there. Does anybody else hear that? If you don't hear it, okay. Anyway, it says they have Congress, they have Senate, they have Washington. Moshe writes. It's all written in Hebrew. He says it was said that in the Senate and in the Congress there was going to be a draft, and it was going to include women also. So they asked Moshe, what should we do about this possibility? So I'm sure that you can imagine he didn't say, go for it. Yeah, 100%, great idea. No, obviously not. It gets better than that. He said, Rav Moshe says, we know that it is not the way of this country, of this government, and the president, Ein Darkom Shahal Memshala V'Hanasi D'Medina Seinu Artos Abris, the United States, La'asos Gzeros Al Yisrael Neged Dinei Torah Seinu. It is not their manner to make decrees against the Torah, HaKadosh. Well, the Vazai, listen to this, you want to talk about judging favorably. Do you have to judge non-Jews favorably? Instead of Tishban Amisecha, you have to judge Jews favorably. Not a bad idea to judge everybody favorably. Great habit gets us in the mindset of positivity and in the mode. It's not absolutely a chiyuv. Moshe, who knows the halacha better than anyone, says, if the United States is thinking of instituting a draft, that would include women as well. They obviously have no idea that this is against the Torah, because they would never, ever institute such a law, the United States, knowingly against the Jews. But Moshe says it right here. It was, by the way, it was Lakifas Noshim Usulos Bein Latzavim. Okay, that was what it was about. It was taking women into the army. He says, therefore, I am positive, says Rav Moshe, that they have no idea this is against the Torah. They've never, ever decreed something clearly against the Torah. We're obligated to do everything possible. Sheyedu Hanasi, L'chol Anshe HaCongress, V'Anshe HaSenate, the Washington. We have to make sure that the president and everybody in the government knows that this is Shehu Keneged Torah. They have to be told, hey, this is against the Torah. It's like causing us to chas v'shalom transgress the law of the Torah. Every Bas Yisrael obviously will not be able to do this, says Rav Moshe. Also, L'chol Bas Yisrael L'chaim Zerazah. So Rav Moshe says, it's just a matter of telling them, and then, of course, they'll rescind this decree. Of course. They won't even institute it. They never actually instituted it. They didn't pass such legislation. He says, but tuach lanu. Rav Moshe says, we're sure they will hold back. They'll never pass such a thing into law. Then he says, listen to the Lashon now. Talk about Akaras Hatov to the United States government. I've never heard it said this way by anybody like this, the way he says it. It'll be good for us in Israel. The Medina Zo, in this country, Asher Heitiva Lanu Kol Hayamim, who's been good to us all the days. V'anachnu Am Yisrael, we live in Israel. Oh Havim Osa, the Ava Gemura. We love the United States with full love. I'm reading you from the English Moshe. Akaras Hatov. V'anachnu Toshavim Nemanim. We are trustworthy citizens, Hamadina, Olam Hamshal, to the country. I know this is going to ruffle some feathers somewhere. Makes it easier, I guess, that it's on Zoom. The thing is, though, I like ruffling feathers, and I like to hear backlash. But we don't have that in this situation. But Anachnu Toshavim Nemanim, the Hamadina, Olam Hamshal, to this rulership, to this government, Leulei Nefesh, with the heart and soul. Shekeni Agam Lahaba. He says, we're sure it's going to continue this way, says Rav Moshe. B'tikva gedolo b'tachon gomor, Rav Moshe says, with great hope and full trust on Ikosei b'chosei b'shem HaTorah HaKadosh in Kol Yisrael. So I just want you to know, a gadol and a tzaddik, that was his attitude toward the United States government. It was Hakaras Hatov. It was pointing out that they've been nice. He came here from Russia, I believe, correct? From Moshe. What, he was thrown in jail for what? Keeping the Torah, teaching Torah, whatever it is. I don't know the history of all that. That's how it was in Europe. So you live here, and that's how the government is. So then he says, just the Lashon is absolutely incredible. Oh Habim Osa Ba'ava Gemura. Puts things in perspective a little bit, huh? That's the same Rav Moshe who said, we're not chayav to make aliyah. We're not chayav to pick up a move. We're going to conclude with a word of inspiration from Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein on Koheles, So I just want to, first of all, thank everyone again, the sponsors, and the fact that whoever is here, such as a list to be learning with you again. And I know some of this was not that relevant, like per se, but there were a lot of concepts in here that we got. We got a concept that if something's not in the Rishonim, it's not in the major poskim, then it's not there. They're surgically precise. We learned about that we're allowed to be here. By the way, it says in the Gemara Makos, Hashem said you won't rest in Gauls. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu. He was tough. He was a tough personality. But it says the Navi came and said, no. He said, it's too much for us. We're allowed to ask for some respite and some tranquility and some serenity, even in Gauls. Moshe Rabbeinu said, you're not going to have any rest in Gauls. The Gemara Makos says, the Navi came later. No. The Navi came and said, Bnei Yisrael can't handle that. To have no rest, no serenity, no tranquility in Gauls, all the years of Gauls, no. It says, Haloch l'har Gio Yisrael. Instead of lo sargia, you won't have any rest. So, that's a really good question. Somebody asked if we could get any more on the song. That's good. All right, maybe on the way here. Oh, sorry, very good. All right, maybe we'll end with one. But I just want you to know that it says in Kohelet, Shomer Ruach lo Yizra, Ro'av Avim lo Yitzar. Make a long story short, the Medrash Rabbi tells us, if a person thinks that the fate of Bnei Yisrael, he Shomer Ruach, he scrutinizes, he follows the intricacies of politics, as it says, the way that Rabbi Leulei actually explains it. It says, Matzavan Shel Yisrael Ba'amin, the Jews' situation among the nations, Beruach HaPolitik Shel HaMadinos, Beruach HaPolitik. He says, if you think that the fate of Bnei Yisrael is dependent, he's tola, Matzavan Shel Yisrael, a person who thinks that our fate depends on the political environment and the mood and the way things are among the nations, and therefore he looks into the Mistare HaPolitik. He goes into all the intricacies and the details and the secrets of politics and tries to, and he's a political analyst, and he says the fate of the Jews depends on this and this nation, this and this country, this and this legislation. It all depends on that. He says that person will never, ever be successful with Torah and mitzvot because he's off the mark, because it doesn't depend. That's what it means, Shomer Ruach. One who guards the spirit, the political environment, and thinks that the Jewish faith depends on that is making a mistake. And it's elaborated on in Kohelet. He looks at the clouds, he sees the clouds, meaning the cloudiness, the pessimism that he sees because it's a certain way in a certain country, then that's how it's going to be for the Jews. Because of that, because a certain president is elected, therefore it'll be this way for the Jews, or it'll be that way. Or because a certain piece of legislation is passed, that means this for the Jews. It's not true. It's up to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So in order to be able to sow and to harvest seeds of spirituality in Torah and mitzvahs, it says we have to divest ourselves of this, emancipate ourselves from thinking that we depend on politics and we depend on governments. This is not true. We depend on the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's what it means. So in order to plant and to harvest and to see our Ma'asim Tovim come to fruition, we have to put our bitachon only in Hashem. We should not be immersed in political intricacies and the experts and the forecasts and speculation. No, it's Hashgachas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Wherever we are, that's what determines our fate. And Mr. Hashem should always be pleasant. Haloch l'har Gio Yisrael. Wherever we're living, it should be restful. Thank you so much for joining us. There had to be, let's see, this says chat. Obviously, I really don't